For 30 years, humanity had played by the rules. They smiled when aliens insulted them. They bowed when ancient species dismissed them. They waited at the back of every line and never complained. Admiral Grace Holloway remembered the day Earth joined the Galactic Concord. She had been a young officer then, full of hope and wonder. The galaxy was vast and filled with thousands of intelligent species. Humanity was the newest member, and Grace had believed they were entering a golden age of cooperation and discovery. She had been wrong. The Concord was not a family of equals. It was a system where old species ruled and young species obeyed. Humans were expected to remain silent for 500 years before they could even vote on simple matters. Their opinions meant nothing. Their concerns were ignored. They existed only to serve those who had come before. Captain Ben Turner understood this better than most. He commanded the diplomatic vessel Steadfast and had spent 15 years carrying ambassadors to council meetings across the galaxy. He had watched Ambassador Patricia Cole craft beautiful speeches that fell on deaf ears. He had seen her swallow her pride 1,000 times when alien leaders treated her like a child. Patricia was 62 years old now. Her hair had turned gray in service to a system that would never respect her. But she kept trying because someone had to represent humanity, even if no one listened. On this particular day, Patricia stood in her quarters aboard the Steadfast, staring at a report that made her hands shake. The colony world of Kepler 442b was in danger. 12 million humans lived there alongside 2 million Telori, a gentle insect-like species who had become humanity's closest friends in the galaxy. The Telori were different from other aliens. When humanity first joined the Concord, most species had treated them with contempt or indifference. But the Telori had welcomed humans with open arms. They shared their farming techniques and star maps without demanding anything in return. They invited human children to play with their larvae. They celebrated human holidays and taught humans their own traditions. For 30 years, the Telori had been the only true friends humanity had in a cold and uncaring galaxy. Now the Veth Dominion wanted to kill them all. The Veth were an ancient reptilian species known for their cruelty. Their war fleet had appeared in orbit around Kepler 442b without warning. Their message was simple and terrifying. The Telori had committed crimes 700 years ago and must be punished. Every single Telori on the planet would die. Humans could leave or share their fate. Patricia immediately contacted the Galactic Concord and begged for help. The response came within an hour from High Arbiter Theska, a towering creature made of living crystal who had ruled the Concord for thousands of years. The Arbiter's words were cold and final. The Veth were acting within their legal rights. The Telori had violated trade agreements long ago. Justice demanded their extinction. Humanity should evacuate and stay out of the matter. Patricia read the message 3 times. Each time, she felt something break inside her. Captain Turner entered her quarters and found her standing perfectly still, her face empty of expression. He had served with her for 10 years and had never seen her look this way. "Ambassador?" he asked quietly. "What are our orders?" Patricia did not answer immediately. She walked to the viewport and looked out at the stars. Somewhere in that darkness, 14 million people waited to learn if they would live or die. "I used to believe in the system," she said finally. "I thought if we were patient enough, polite enough, obedient enough, they would eventually accept us. I told myself the rules existed for good reasons, that the ancient species knew things we didn't understand." She turned to face Turner. Her eyes were dry, but something burned behind them that he had never seen before. "They're going to murder 2 million innocent people, Ben. People who showed us kindness when no one else would. And the Concord says it's legal. They say it's justice." Turner said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Get me a direct communication line to Earth," Patricia ordered. To Secretary General Nathan Price, use our highest encryption. I don't care if the Concorde sees it. Ma'am, if we communicate outside proper channels, they could strip your diplomatic status. They could ban humanity from future council sessions. Patricia laughed. It was not a happy sound. What council sessions, Ben? The ones where we sit in silence while they ignore us. The ones where we beg for scraps of respect and receive nothing. She shook her head. I'm done. Get me that line. Turner nodded and left to carry out her orders. He understood. Something had changed in the ambassador, and he suspected it had changed in him too. While they waited for the connection to Earth, Patricia began reviewing classified files she had gathered over the years. She had always been curious about the Concorde's history, about the species that had disappeared over the millennia. Now she searched with desperate purpose. What she found made her sick. The trade violation the Veth claimed the Talori had committed 700 years ago did not exist. The records had been fabricated. Patricia found evidence of 17 other species that had been exterminated under similar false pretenses. The pattern was clear and horrifying. The Galactic Concorde was not a government. It was a machine for legal murder. Ancient species used it to eliminate anyone they found inconvenient, and younger species were too afraid to object. When the connection to Earth finally came through, Patricia did not waste words on pleasantries. Secretary General, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to tell you things that will change everything. And when I'm finished, you need to make a decision that will determine what kind of species humanity will be. On Earth, Nathan Price leaned forward in his chair. He was a simple man in many ways, a former teacher who had never expected to lead all of humanity. But he recognized the weight in Patricia's voice. Tell me everything, he said. And she did. For nearly an hour, Patricia Cole laid out the truth about the Galactic Concorde. She explained the manufactured crimes, the legal genocides, the silence of species too afraid to speak. She described the Veth fleet in orbit around a world where millions of humans and Talori waited for help that might never come. When she finished, the line was silent for a long moment. How long do we have? Nathan asked. 72 hours before the Veth begin their attack. That's not enough time to evacuate everyone. No, Patricia agreed. It's not. Another silence. Then Nathan Price spoke again, and his voice had changed. The careful politician was gone. In his place was something older and simpler. Don't evacuate anyone. I'm calling an emergency session of the United Earth Council. We're going to vote. Vote on what? On whether humanity is going to war. Nathan Price had been Secretary General for 12 years. He was known for being calm and patient. He never made quick decisions. He always listened to his advisors before acting. But when Ambassador Cole's message ended, he did something he had never done before. He called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Council without asking anyone for advice. The council chamber was a massive room in Geneva that could hold 500 people. Within 2 hours, it was full. Representatives from every nation, every colony, and every human settlement across 3-star systems joined the meeting. Some attended in person. Others appeared as holographic images floating above their assigned seats. The noise was incredible. Everyone was talking at once, demanding to know why they had been summoned with such urgency. Nathan let them talk for exactly 5 minutes. Then he raised his hand, and the chamber fell silent. You have all received Ambassador Cole's report, he began. The Veth Dominion plans to kill every Talori on Kepler 442b. The Galactic Concorde has ruled this action legal. 12 million of our people live on that world. The Concorde has kindly offered to let us evacuate them before the killing starts. Representative Linda Mason from the North American Union spoke first. How much time do we have? 72 hours. The chamber exploded with voices again. People shouted numbers and logistics. Their fleet could not possibly move 12 million people in 3 days. It was impossible. They would need weeks, maybe months. Nathan let them argue. He understood their fear and confusion. But he also knew something they did not know yet, something that would change everything. After 5 minutes, he raised his hand again. There was something else. Something Ambassador Cole discovered during her investigation. He activated a holographic display. A map of the galaxy appeared, covered with dozens of red dots. The crime the Veth claimed the Talori committed 700 years ago never happened. The records were falsified. These red markers show 17 species that have been completely destroyed over the past 3,000 years using the same method. The Concord knew about all of them. They did nothing. The silence that followed was absolute. The Galactic Concord is not a government of peace and justice. It is a system that allows powerful species to murder weaker ones whenever they choose. They write laws that make genocide legal. They create false evidence to justify extinction. And they have been doing this since before humans learned to make fire. Representative Danny Ortega from South America stood slowly. He was an old man with white hair and tired eyes, but his voice was strong. "What are you asking us to do, Secretary General?" Nathan looked around the chamber. He saw teachers and farmers and doctors and soldiers. He saw ordinary people who had been chosen by their communities to make impossible decisions. "I am asking you to vote. Not on evacuation. On war." The debate lasted 6 hours. Some representatives argued that humanity could not win against ancient species with thousands of years of military experience. They pointed out that humans had never fought a real space war. Their ships were smaller and weaker than Veth vessels. Going to war would mean the deaths of millions, perhaps the end of humanity itself. Others spoke of principles and moral duty. They reminded the chamber that the Talori had been kind to humanity when no one else cared. They argued that some things were worth dying for, that humanity would lose its soul if it abandoned friends to genocide. Representative Maria Reyes from the Pacific Islands spoke near the end of the debate. She was young, barely 30 years old, and had been silent throughout the long hours of argument. "I keep hearing people talk about what we might lose if we fight," she said. "But no one is talking about what we lose if we don't. If we run away today, what do we tell our children? What do we tell ourselves when we look in the mirror? What do we tell ourselves when we tell ourselves when we tell ourselves when we look in the mirror? That we were safe? That we survived?" She shook her head. "I don't want to survive that way. I don't want to be part of a species that watches friends die and does nothing because it's convenient." When the vote finally came, it was not close. 412 representatives voted yes. 7 voted no. Humanity would go to war. Nathan Price stood at the podium and looked out at the chamber. Some people were crying. Others sat in stunned silence. A few were already making calls, mobilizing resources, preparing for what was to come. "There is one more thing," Nathan said. "I will personally write our response to the Veth Dominion and the Galactic Concord. This message will be broadcast on every channel, to every species across the entire galaxy. It will make clear exactly who we are and what we stand for." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "For 30 years, we have been polite. We have followed rules designed to keep us silent and small. We have smiled at insults and accepted our place at the bottom of their hierarchy." His voice grew stronger. "No more. If we are going to die, we will die standing up. And the galaxy will remember." Across human space, the news spread like wildfire. On Luna, retired Admiral Grace Holloway watched the vote results in her small apartment. Her granddaughter Katie sat beside her, barely 20 years old and fresh from the academy. "Grandma?" Katie asked. "What are you doing?" Grace had already risen from her chair and was walking toward her bedroom with purpose she had not felt in years. "Finding my uniform?" she answered. "They're gonna need every pilot they can get." "You're 73 years old." Grace turned and smiled. It was not a soft smile. "And I've been waiting 73 years for humanity to finally stand up for something. I'm not missing this." On Kepler 442b, Governor Maria Santos gathered the colony's leaders in her office. Humans and Talori sat side by side, waiting for news from Earth. When the vote results came through, the room was silent for a long moment. Elder Chittick, the leader of the Talori community, spoke first. His insect-like face could not show human expressions, but his voice was heavy with emotion. "Your people would go to war for us. They would die for us." Maria took his forelimb in her hand, the Talori gesture of friendship. "You were kind to us when we had nothing. You taught us and fed us and called us friends when the whole galaxy called us children." She squeezed gently. "Did you really think we would forget? Kindness is not a reason for species to die. Maybe that's been the problem with this galaxy all along. Maybe nobody ever taught them that kindness is the only reason worth dying for." Outside the office window, the first Veth warships were visible as tiny points of light in the evening sky. 14 million people looked up at them and waited, but they were no longer waiting for rescue. They were waiting for war. In Geneva, Nathan Price sat alone in his office, writing the most important document in human history. He wrote and rewrote, searching for the perfect words. This message would define humanity. It would tell the galaxy exactly who they were. He thought about his grandmother, who had survived a war when she was young. She used to tell him that there were times when good people had to fight, even when winning seemed impossible. She said that standing up for what was right was more important than living on your knees. He had never really understood her until now. By morning, the message was ready. It was time to tell the galaxy that humanity was done being quiet. The message arrived on every Veth warship at the same moment. It appeared on screens across the Galactic Concord's communication network. Every species with access to galactic broadcasts received it simultaneously. It carried humanity's official seal and the signature of Secretary General Nathan Price. On the Veth flagship, Admiral Kesseth read the message with growing disbelief. His reptilian eyes narrowed as he processed each word. In 300 years of military service, he had never received anything like this. The message began simply, "To the Veth Dominion and the Galactic Concord. From the United Earth Council and all the people of Earth, for 30 years, humanity has followed your rules. We bowed when you demanded it. We waited when you told us to wait. We smiled through your insults and accepted our place at the bottom of your hierarchy. We believed this was the price of peace. We believed our patience would eventually earn us respect. We were wrong. Your rules do not exist to maintain order. They exist to enable murder. Your laws are not justice. They are a mask that covers the faces of killers. For 3,000 years, you have made genocide legal and called it civilization. No more. Humanity formally withdraws from the Galactic Concord. We reject your authority. We reject your laws. We reject your judgment. We do not recognize the Veth Dominion's claims against the Talori people. We do not recognize any species' right to commit extinction. To the Veth fleet currently threatening Kepler 442b. You have 6 hours to leave the system. After that time, any ship that remains will be treated as an enemy and destroyed. This is not a negotiation. This is not a diplomatic request. This is a promise. Enough. No more decorum. Signed, Secretary General Nathan Price, on behalf of every human being, past, present, and future. Admiral Kesseth stared at the message for a long time. Then he began to laugh. "They are insane," he said to his officers. 31 human ships against our 47? They will be destroyed in hours. His second-in-command, a younger Veth named Desser, seemed less certain. Admiral, the humans have never made threats before. They have always been careful and quiet. This is unexpected. It is desperation. Nothing more. Kesseth waved his clawed hand dismissively. Prepare the fleet for battle. We will crush these newcomers and then finish our work with the Telori. Across the galaxy, other species reacted to humanity's message with shock and confusion. On the Concord's central station, High Arbiter Theska gathered the Council of Ancient Species for an emergency meeting. Her crystalline form pulsed with agitated light as she addressed the assembled leaders. The humans have lost their minds, declared Ambassador Vorn of the Kellish Empire, a species of tentacled beings who had been part of the Concord for 10,000 years. They cannot win this fight. They must know this. Perhaps they do not care about winning, said another voice. It came from a small observer's booth at the edge of the chamber. The speaker was Prelate Isk of the Fanari, a young species who had joined the Concord only 2 centuries before humanity. The ancient species turned to look at Isk with contempt. You were not given permission to speak, Theska said coldly. No, Isk agreed. I was not. But I am speaking anyway, just like the humans. Silence fell over the chamber. No young species had ever spoken out of turn in Concord history. The rules were clear. The punishment was severe, but Isk continued. For 200 years, my people have watched and stayed silent. We watched the Veth destroy the Korani. We watched the Concord approve the extinction of the Beleth. We told ourselves it was not our concern. We told ourselves the rules existed for good reasons. Isk stood straighter, his small form somehow commanding attention. We were afraid. We are still afraid. But the humans have shown us something today. They have shown us that fear is a choice. And so is courage. High Arbiter Theska's light pulsed dangerously. You will be silent, or your species will face consequences. Then we will face them. Isk's voice did not waver. The Fanari stand with humanity. In the observation galleries around the chamber, representatives of dozens of young species watched this exchange with wide eyes. Some of them had been silent for centuries, afraid to draw attention to themselves. Now they looked at each other with new expressions on their alien faces. On Luna, Admiral Grace Holloway pulled on her old uniform for the first time in 15 years. It still fit, though it was tighter than she remembered. Her granddaughter Katie helped her with the medals. I thought you said war was terrible, Katie said quietly. You told me stories about the losses, the pain, the friends you buried. It is terrible, Grace agreed. War is the worst thing in the galaxy. But sometimes there are things worse than war. Watching innocent people die while you do nothing is worse. Living with the knowledge that you could have helped but chose not to is worse. She looked at herself in the mirror. An old woman in a uniform that belonged to another era. But her eyes were clear and determined. I spent my whole career trying to keep the peace. I smiled at aliens who treated us like animals. I followed orders that made me sick. I told myself it was necessary. She turned to face Katie. I was wrong. Some fights cannot be avoided. Some evils must be opposed. This is one of those times. Katie nodded slowly. I want to come with you. You just graduated. You've never seen combat. Neither have you. Not really. None of us have. Katie's jaw was set. But we're going to learn together. Grace looked at her granddaughter for a long moment. Then she smiled, and this time it was warm. Your mother is going to kill me. Probably. But she'll be proud too, eventually. As the 6-hour deadline approached, human ships gathered from across their territory. They came from patrol routes and training exercises. They came from orbital stations and colony defense positions. Every vessel that could fly was called to Kepler-442b. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the carrier Resolute, watching the tactical display fill with friendly signatures. 31 ships. That was all they had. Her communications officer, a young woman named Susan Park, looked up from her console. "Commander, I'm receiving messages from across the fleet. Personal messages. They're saying goodbye to their families. Just in case." Lisa nodded. She understood. She had already sent her own message to her mother on Earth. "What about the Veth?" she asked. "No movement. They're holding position around the planet. They think we're bluffing." Lisa shook her head. "They think we'll back down at the last moment because that's what we've always done. Will we?" Lisa looked at the young officer. Susan was 24 years old. She had joined the fleet to see the galaxy and explore new worlds. She had never expected to fight a war. "No," Lisa said quietly. "We won't." The countdown continued. 5 hours. 4. 3. Across the galaxy, species who had been silent for centuries began to whisper among themselves. The Phanari had spoken out. The humans had declared war. The old order was cracking. 2 hours. 1. The Veth fleet remained in position. They did not believe humanity would attack. They had ruled the galaxy for too long to imagine that anyone would seriously challenge them. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 6-hour deadline expired at exactly 4 in the morning. Station time. Commander Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the Resolute, watching the tactical display. 47 red dots represented Veth warships. 31 blue dots represented humanity's entire available fleet. The numbers were not in their favor. "Commander," her tactical officer Mike Chun reported, "the Veth fleet is powering up their shields. But they haven't activated weapons yet." "They still don't believe we'll fight," Lisa said. "They think this is a bluff. Is it?" She turned to look at him. Mike was 26 years old and brilliant at his job. He was also terrified. She could see it in his eyes and the slight tremor of his hands. She could not blame him. She was terrified too. "No," she said. "It's not." For 10 minutes after the deadline passed, nothing happened. The two fleets hung in space, separated by less than 100,000 kilometers. Everyone waited. Then the Veth flagship powered its main weapons. Lisa spoke 2 words. "All ships, engage." What followed would be remembered for centuries. Human vessels were smaller and less powerful than Veth warships. Everyone knew this. The Veth had been fighting wars for 3,000 years. Humans had never fought anyone. By every measure that mattered, humanity should have been destroyed in the first hour. But the Veth made a mistake. They assumed humans would fight the way every other species fought. They expected orderly formations and predictable tactics. They expected their enemy to follow the rules of space combat that had been established for millennia. Humans did not follow rules. Commander Grant led her carrier straight at the Veth flagship, while her escort ships scattered in what looked like random directions. The Veth commanders watched with confusion. This made no sense. The humans were exposing their most important ship to direct attack, but it was not random. It was chaos with purpose. As the Veth focused their fire on the Resolute, smaller human ships attacked from unexpected angles. They used asteroids as cover. They made dangerous maneuvers that should have been impossible. They sacrificed positioning for speed, trading safety for aggression. The Veth tried to coordinate their response, but human ships never stayed still long enough to target. They swarmed like insects, biting and retreating, never letting the enemy rest. Targeting their communications array, Weapons Officer Sarah Mills called out, "If we can blind their flagship, do it." The shot was precise. A burst of energy crossed the void, and struck the Veth command ship exactly where its communication systems were housed. In an instant, Admiral Kesseth lost contact with his fleet without orders from their leader. The Veth captains had to make their own decisions. Some continued attacking. Others hesitated. A few began to retreat. The unified fleet became 47 individual ships fighting 47 individual battles. The human fleet stayed coordinated. They communicated constantly, adjusting their tactics in real time. When one ship was in danger, others came to help. When an opportunity appeared, they struck together. Admiral Grace Holloway commanded a squadron of fighters from the cockpit of her own vessel. At 73 years old, she was the oldest pilot in the battle. She was also one of the best. "Form up on my wing," she ordered her squadron. "We're going after their supply ships. Cut off their fuel and ammunition, and this fight ends faster." Her granddaughter Katie flew beside her, young and scared but steady. "Grandma, we've got 4 Veth interceptors coming in from the left. I see them. Stay close and follow my lead." Grace threw her fighter into a spinning dive that should have been impossible for a pilot her age. Katie followed, matching her grandmother's movements with the quick reflexes of youth. Together, they led the Veth interceptors into an asteroid field where the larger, less maneuverable ships could not follow. "Got one," Katie reported as her weapons found their target. 3 remaining. Nice shooting. Now let's finish this." Across the battlefield, similar stories played out. Human pilots used creativity and courage to overcome superior technology. Human ships took wounds that should have destroyed them and kept fighting. Human crews refused to surrender even when their situation seemed hopeless. 4 hours into the battle, the Veth fleet began to break. Admiral Kesseth finally restored partial communications and saw disaster on his tactical display. 14 of his ships had been destroyed. Another 12 were heavily damaged. His fleet was scattered and disorganized. The humans had lost 7 ships. Only 7. "This is impossible," he whispered. "They are children. They know nothing of war." His second-in-command, Desser, answered quietly. "Perhaps that is why they fight so well. They do not know how they are supposed to fight. So they fight however they need to. What do we do?" Desser was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke words no Veth officer had spoken in 3,000 years. "We should surrender." Kesseth turned to stare at him with horror. "Surrender? To these newcomers? We will lose if we continue. More of our people will die. The humans have proven their point. They are willing to fight. They are capable of winning." Desser met his admiral's eyes. There is no shame in accepting reality. For a long moment, Kesseth considered ordering his remaining ships to fight to the death. Pride demanded it. Tradition demanded it. Every lesson he had learned in 300 years of service demanded it. But he looked at his tactical display and saw his ships dying. He thought about the families waiting at home. He thought about young Veth, who would never return because their admiral was too proud to admit defeat. "All ships," he said finally, his voice heavy with shame. "Stand down. Signal our surrender to the human fleet." On the bridge of the Resolute, Commander Elisa Grant received the message with disbelief. "They're surrendering?" she asked. "All of them?" 23 ships confirmed, Commander. The rest have already fled the system." Lisa sat down heavily in her command chair. Her hands were shaking. Her uniform was soaked with sweat. She had not slept in over 30 hours. "We won," she said quietly. "We actually won." Around her, the bridge crew began to cheer. The sound spread through the ship, then through the fleet, as the news was confirmed. Humans had faced an ancient enemy and emerged victorious, but Lisa did not celebrate. She thought about the 7 ships they had lost. She thought about the crews who would never go home. She thought about the messages she would have to write to their families. "This is just the beginning," she said to no one in particular. The Veth were one species. The Concord has hundreds. They'll come for us now. All of them. Our executive officer, a steady man named Pete Harris, nodded soberly. "What do we do?" Lisa looked out the viewport at the planet they had saved. 14 million people were down there, human and Talori together. They had fought for those people. They had died for them. "We prepare," she said, "and we find allies, because humanity can't win this alone." In the observation galleries of the Galactic Concord, representatives of young species watched the battle's outcome with amazement. The humans had won. The humans had actually won. Something had changed in the galaxy, and everyone knew it. The old rules no longer applied. The Galactic Concord held an emergency meeting 3 days after the battle. The Great Chamber was fuller than it had been in centuries. Every species sent representatives. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. High Arbiter Theska stood at the center of the chamber, her crystalline form glowing with agitated light. For 3,000 years, she had maintained order through fear and tradition. Now, that order was crumbling. Ambassador Patricia Cole arrived without official credentials. Humanity had withdrawn from the Concord, which meant she had no legal standing. She was accompanied by Admiral Grace Holloway, still wearing her flight suit from the battle. "You come without permission," Theska said coldly. "You have no voice here." Patricia smiled. It was not a diplomatic smile. "We are not here to speak to you," she said. "We are here to speak to them." She turned to face the observation galleries, where representatives of hundreds of species watched in silence. Some were ancient members of the Concord who had helped design its cruel system. Others were young civilizations like humanity, forced into silence and submission for centuries. "Look at yourselves," Patricia said. Her voice carried through the vast chamber. "Some of you have been sitting in those galleries for 1,000 years, waiting for permission to speak. Some of you have watched entire species disappear and told yourselves it was not your concern. Some of you have lived in constant fear, wondering if you would be next." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Humanity proved something at Kepler 442b. We proved that the old rules only work if everyone follows them. We proved that even a young species can defeat an ancient enemy if they are willing to fight. We proved that the Concord's power was always an illusion, built on fear and silence." High Arbiter Theska's form pulsed dangerously. "You speak of illusions? We have maintained peace for 3,000 years. We have prevented wars that would have destroyed civilizations." "You have prevented nothing," Patricia replied. "You have simply controlled who does the killing. 17 species have been exterminated under your watch. 17 entire civilizations erased from existence. You called it legal. You called it justice. But it was just murder with paperwork." A murmur ran through the galleries. Young species who had never dared to speak looked at each other with growing courage. Ancient species who had benefited from the system shifted uncomfortably. Prelate Isk of the Fanari stood in his gallery. "The humans speak truth. My species has lived in fear for 2 centuries. We have watched and stayed silent because we thought we had no choice. But there is always a choice." Another voice joined his. Then another. Species that had been silent for generations began to speak, their words tumbling over each other in a growing chorus of dissent. Theska raised her crystalline limbs for silence. "Enough. This is chaos. This is the destruction of everything we have built." "Good," Patricia said simply. "What you built deserved to be destroyed." She stepped forward, facing the High Arbiter directly. "Here is what humanity wants. Real representation for all species, regardless of how old they are. An end to manufactured crimes and legal genocides. Actual consequences for those who commit atrocities. A concord that protects the weak instead of enabling the powerful. These are significant demands. Then consider them carefully, because humanity is not going anywhere, and neither is anyone else, if we have anything to say about it. The debate that followed lasted for weeks. Ancient species argued that the old system was necessary, but chaos would destroy the galaxy without their firm control. Young species countered that the old system had only protected those at the top, while everyone else lived in fear. In the end, change came not through a single dramatic moment, but through countless small decisions. Species that had been silent began to vote together. Trade agreements were renegotiated. Military alliances shifted. The Veth Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, withdrew from galactic politics entirely. Other ancient species that had enjoyed protected status under the old rules found their influence fading. The Concord did not collapse, but it transformed into something new and uncertain. Admiral Grace Holloway returned to Luna after the fighting ended. Her granddaughter Katie shipped out on her first assignment aboard a patrol vessel. Their mission was simple: escort refugees from a species fleeing persecution to safe harbor. "You know," Katie said during one of their video calls, "I used to wonder what humanity was supposed to be. Out here, surrounded by all these ancient civilizations, I felt so small, so young, like we did not matter. And now?" Grace asked. "Now I think maybe that is exactly what the galaxy needed. Someone young enough to be angry at injustice instead of accepting it. Someone small enough to understand what it means to be afraid." Katie smiled through the screen. "Someone human enough to fight for strangers." Grace nodded slowly. "That is as good a definition as any." On Kepler 442b, the colony began to rebuild. Governor Maria Santos worked alongside Elder Chittick to integrate human and Talori communities more deeply than before. Children of both species grew up together, learning each other's languages and customs. One evening, Maria and Chittick stood on a hillside overlooking the main settlement. Below them, lights flickered on in homes where humans and Talori lived as neighbors. Laughter drifted up from a playground where young of both species chased each other in some game they had invented together. "Do you think it will last?" Chittick asked. "This new order your people are building?" Maria thought about the question for a long time. "I do not know," she admitted. "Nothing lasts forever. The galaxy is still full of species who want power and control. There will be more fights, more sacrifices, more days when we wonder if any of it was worth it." She turned to face her friend. "But that is not the point, is it? The point is not to build something that lasts forever. The point is to build something worth protecting, something that makes life a little better, a little kinder, for as long as we can manage it." Chittick's compound eyes reflected the lights below. "Your people could have abandoned us. You could have evacuated and saved yourselves. We could have. But then we would not have been us anymore. We would have been something smaller, something afraid." Maria placed her hand on Chittick's forelimb. "You showed us kindness when we had nothing to offer in return. You taught us that friendship does not require payment. How could we repay that by running away? Most species would have. Maybe. But most species had forgotten why they reached for the stars in the first place. They forgot that the point was not to conquer or control. The point was to find friends, to discover wonders, to become something greater than we were alone." Above them, ships passed through the evening sky. Some were human. Some were Talori. Some belonged to species that had never dared to show themselves before humanity's stand against the Veth. A galaxy that had accepted cruelty as normal was slowly, painfully learning to imagine something different. Secretary General Nathan Price gave a speech on the anniversary of the battle. He stood in the same chamber where humanity had voted for war, surrounded by the representatives who had made that impossible choice. 1 year ago, we faced a decision that no one should ever have to make. We chose to fight, knowing we might lose everything. We chose to stand with friends, knowing we might die with them. He paused, looking around at familiar faces. We did not know if we would win. We did not know if anyone would remember us. We only knew that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible. He smiled, and for a moment, he looked like the simple teacher he had been before politics found him. The galaxy is different now. Not perfect, not even close, but different. And that difference began with a simple choice. It began with ordinary people deciding that kindness was worth more than safety. That friendship was worth more than comfort. That standing up was worth more than survival. He raised his hand in a simple wave. Thank you, all of you, for reminding the galaxy what humanity means. In homes across human space, people watched the speech with tears in their eyes. They remembered the fear of that first day. They remembered the uncertainty, the doubt, the long hours of waiting. They also remembered the moment when they chose courage over fear. Enough. No, more decorum. Just the quiet. Stubborn insistence that kindness was worth fighting for, and it always would be.